Good afternoon, DEC members, members of the media, and a special hello to University of Windsor students who we invited to participate in our meeting today. My name is Steve Grigorian. I'm the president and CEO of the Detroit Economic Club. I certainly hope everyone is healthy, and we're looking forward to getting back in person later on this year when it's safe to do so, but welcome to today's meeting. For today's meeting, you're all going to be muted, but like any other DEC meeting, we want to hear from you. So we're going to ask you to use the chat function, and we'll get to some of your questions later in the program today. And just like every DEC meeting, we start on time and stop on time. So I promise Stacey will let her get back to her important job at 3 o'clock today. So let's get started. We're so pleased to host Stacey Cunningham. She's the president of the NYSE Group, which operates 5 equity exchanges and a couple other options markets as well. She was scheduled to visit the DEC in April, but for obvious reasons, we had to postpone. We're hoping that when it is safe to do so, that she'll come back and visit us later this year in person. So Stacey, welcome. We so appreciate your time, especially on a day like today when the market's open.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks for having me on. And I'm also disappointed that I wasn't able to meet you in person. I do want to say that, thank you to all of those that have been, dealing with this on the front line. Certainly our healthcare workers. I don't think we can thank them enough, and all the people that are going to work and providing services to us. And my deepest sympathies go out to anybody in your community that's been impacted this directly. It's a struggle for so many.
Thank you, and I completely concur. So it's a new world for me. I'm working from my kitchen counter. I guess let's just start by asking you, how are you adapting to working from home?
It's certainly been an adjustment. When you leave the New York Stock Exchange, that tends to be an on-site role where I do end up being in the building a lot. So it was interesting to adjust to working remotely, and figuring out that I had to allocate food to go prepare food was certainly an adjustment. I'm like, I need lunch. I can't just go out to a corner deli or something right now. So it's been an adjustment, but I have to say our teams have all done a great job in getting us up and running across the board. And like so many companies, a shout out to the IT teams that got that done so quickly.
That's terrific. My problem is I'm a arm's reach to the refrigerator, and that's not a good thing. So,
yeah.
So let's just get started and talk about the markets. I guess first question, we've seen tremendous volatility in the market since the COVID-19 crisis began. I'm going to ask you to maybe put this into historical context. Have we seen market activity like this before?
Yeah, this certainly is a historic period of time on its own, and it's unprecedented in many ways. We have seen certainly periods of volatility in the past, but they all have their own unique flavor and unique reaction to what's going on in the markets, and markets react to uncertainty. That is the driver to volatility, and there are so many uncertain things right now about how quickly will the virus get under control, how quickly will we have drugs, how quickly will the economy be able to recover, and those businesses that have been shut for a while. So there's a lot of uncertainty in the market, and we're seeing the market absorb that. Markets move more quickly now because information is shared more rapidly. So you see more dramatic moves in the market than you did historically. But we've certainly set a lot of records. I mean, we had, I think it was March 24th, where the market moved up 2,000 points. We haven't seen market moves like that since, back to the days of the Depression. And we've seen 8 consecutive trading sessions where the market was up or down 4% in 8 consecutive days, and had a 4% move. We had fewer than that over the past 10 years, so certainly historic times.
Yeah, and throughout this time, I know you've been very, very vocal about keeping the markets open. Why is this so important? Explain that to us.
It is very important, and it is something that we've been vocal to share that message. And it's because certainly in the beginning of March, when the market was selling off so dramatically, there was a lot of anxiety around what impact that was going to have on 401ks, what impact that was going to have for investors over the long term. And so there were some who were saying, hey, we should just close the markets and take a pause and wait until they recover a bit and we understand how this virus is going to play out, and then we can reopen the markets because it will stop the pain. The issue with closing the markets, there are a number of different reasons why it isn't recommended. One, you just mask the underlying anxiety. You don't actually change the underlying concerns that are driving the market down. And if you're talking about closing the markets for a long period of time, if you close them for a few days, you're not actually going to stop them from going down when they reopen. You're going to have that pent up pressure once it reopens. If it was closed for an extended period of time, you're actually denying people access to their money. And so especially during this time frame where so many people found themselves laid off or out of work, they need to have access to money that they may have invested in the market. And we don't just prevent investors from getting access to their investments. That in itself can add additional anxiety. Even talking about the possibility of closing the market, we saw that put additional pressure on the market, which is why we were so clear that we weren't considering it. Secretary Mnuchin wasn't considering it. Chairman Clayton at the SEC wasn't considering it. And I felt it important for people to understand that we weren't actually going to close the market so that we didn't see additional pressure on the market because people were afraid they weren't going to be able to get their money out if somebody decided to close the market. The final reason why I think it's very important for the market to be open is it is a litmus test, and it provides very valuable information. People are behind the market. It's people that create the markets, and that public sentiment is reflected in the market. That's valuable information for those who are in decision-making positions. We saw that stimulus package get passed in a bipartisan way very, very quickly. I think in large part because it was clearly understood that there was a lot of anxiety around what we were seeing. And you could see that because the market was free falling at that moment in time. If we didn't have that visibility, I'm not quite sure we would have seen such swift action.
Let's talk about the stock market as a leading indicator. I think many people believe it is, and it is. But does the market's rally off of its lows suggest the economy might follow a similar pattern, a sharp decline, and then hopefully, crossing fingers, followed by a quick recovery? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we've seen even over the past couple of days is we've seen the market reverse again, and when there's new information, right? So we start to see what's happening in the oil market. That put additional pressure. The market does not reflect the health of the economy. It reflects how people feel about the economy, how people feel about the future of individual stocks, which is very different than the health of the economy. And it's also a bit skewed. What we saw over this last period of time, especially during the market recovery, was that the 5 largest stocks in the S&P 500, the large technology names, ended up becoming 20% of the S&P 500. So when you're looking at the performance of the S&P 500, you think, well, look, the market's recovered, but it's really skewed by just five stocks. If you look more broadly at the Russell 2000 and a broader cross-section of the market and not including the largest ones, you actually saw it had not recovered quite the same way that the S&P 500 did. I do believe the market will recover as we get more information about protections that we're going to put in place. So if investors are focused on the long term and you're not trying to manage your 401k during the most turbulent time in the market, you're going to be better off just waiting and letting the market run its course and get to a more stable place. I think like we're seeing today, you're going to continue to see some rapid movements as information evolves.
Yeah, I haven't looked since around noon, so I'll look when we're done with this call. But you talked about the government response. They've certainly responded in unprecedented ways. Do you think we're on the right track with programs like the $2.3 trillion loan announcement, the CARES Act, and any other thing we've seen from the government?
I definitely think that I have been extraordinarily encouraged by the rapid response from the government across the board. I spent throughout the past 6 weeks a lot of time talking to city, state, federal officials, talking to CEOs of listed companies, talking to, you know, a broad cross-section of individuals, and they've all been focused on solutions. And I think that's really critical. I mean, crisis is really what truly defines us. And as Americans, we've been rising to that challenge, and we've all been trying to contribute to the solutions. You see people set aside their political differences during a crisis more rapidly than you would see that during other periods of time. So we need to capitalize on this right now so we can get things done quickly. I think it's much easier to get things done right now than it would be in 6 months. So I do think we need to make sure we keep that same focus. I think the steps that we've taken so far are definitely constructive. We saw it reflected immediately in the market. Now, it's not necessarily, we haven't yet seen exactly how it's going to help all businesses, small businesses, and that's really where we need to work. But I think we need to make some attempts to drive positive change, and then learn from what we've seen and continue to iterate on. That's what I think we're going to do. It's hard to do quickly and perfectly. So I focus on trying to get things out where we see the areas that need additional attention.
Yeah, you mentioned how companies are responding, and I know recently you published an op-ed in Forbes, or Fortune, I should say, that you talked about the work of companies, including several Michigan-based companies. So what are your takeaways from those actions?
I've been so inspired by the listed companies and the actions that they're taking. And Steve, you can hear me okay?
It's breaking up a little bit, so I don't know if it's my Bluetooth. I'm going to try and turn that off.
Maybe it's my Bluetooth. Is that better? Can you hear me?
I can, yes. Yes. Yeah, and a couple people are now chatting and say that's better, yes.
Okay, great. Sorry. So the listed companies have really risen to the challenge. And if you think about how broad their reach is, there are 43 million, 45 million people that are directly employed by companies that are listed on the New York Stock Exchange. Those companies are taking extraordinary measures. Many of the Michigan-based companies were included in my op-ed because whether it's GM and Ford turning their plants into creating ventilators, or companies like Stryker that are creating emergency test beds for facilities and getting approval to introduce new mechanisms. I mean, across the board, we've seen companies take unprecedented actions. We haven't seen that since World War II, where we really saw companies rising to the challenge in a united way to battle this pandemic. That's the only way we're going to get through this, if we, come together and find solutions, especially for those that are impacted most, and put all of our attention there. That's why I have such high confidence that we're going to get to the other side of this sooner rather than later. The amount of effort going into finding vaccines and introducing testing for not just the virus, but for antibodies. Think about how quickly the information is changing from week to week. Every week we learn so much more about the virus itself, about the disease, about the level of testing, and it's going to take the private sector to really drive our advancement through this. And I began this year thinking a lot about capitalism as we were going into an election cycle, because I'm a capitalist, and I believe strongly in our capital markets being the engine that have powered the growth of this nation. But I understood at the time there was a lot of talk about whether or not we should be rethinking the capitalist economy. And what I think we've seen right now is the power of the capital markets. We've had companies that are struggling because of the conditions, like Carnival Cruise Lines, like others, Darden today, that have used the capital markets to raise additional money. And I think that's one of the values that we can provide throughout this period of time. But the companies themselves have been fantastic.
Yeah, you mentioned capitalism. I was going to ask you, do you see this crisis reshaping the conversations about capitalism? We are in an election year, of course, and I wondered your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a strong testament to the value of companies and what they can accomplish. There's a lot of talk about companies being focused on shareholders versus stakeholders. And I don't believe that is as dramatic of a shift as it sometimes seems. I think companies are always focused on stakeholders. If you're going to be a long-term, well-run company, you have to be focused on your employees and your communities and all of the other influencers you have around in your environment beyond just your shareholders. And that's second nature, and that's what you're seeing right now. These companies aren't thinking about, hey, what's my bottom line? They're all donating making financial contributions, completely redesigning their businesses to help be part of a solution. That's because they care about stakeholders, and that's second nature. That's not new.
Great. Stacey, you agreed to take some audience questions, and we're about 13 minutes till we have to say goodbye. But if you're good, I'm going to ask you a couple of the questions. So we received a number of questions yesterday from the attendees via email, and I'll start with a couple of those. And then while you're responding, I'm going to take a look at the chat questions and maybe throw a couple of those in there as well. So yesterday, we did receive many questions specific about when you first closed the floor. Well, actually not when you first closed, but just the impact of the floor being closed. And have you had to deal with any issues that you didn't think about? And also maybe, when do you think it'll be the right time? What will your decision process be for reopening the floor?
It was certainly a difficult decision to close the trading floor for a number of reasons. One, there are small businesses down there that are working on the trading floor. But importantly, too, the reason why we continue to operate a trading floor, despite the fact that it's certainly easy to automate trading, and we have, as you mentioned, 5 equity markets, and only one of them has a trading floor. We keep the trading floor because our stocks trade with less volatility when there are people involved. And if you take the best technology and then layer on human judgment, you actually have narrower bid-ask spreads. You have less volatility in trading throughout the day. So given that we were during this we were making this decision in the middle of a historically high volatility period, we wanted to have all those tools in the box to be able to leverage the trading floor and the value that it provides. So we took a number of measures over the past 6-7 weeks. First, we started by socially distancing on the floor, decreasing the number of people that were coming into the building. We started to eliminate guests. We ended up sending home the following week all of the other people that worked in the building that didn't support the floor, so roughly 700 people. So we were reducing the number of people that were coming in. And then we implemented screening and temperature checks so that we could continue to operate the trading floor at a lower risk, in a lower risk environment. What we saw was not just within the building, we had a couple of test results come back positive for people in the building, but importantly, we were seeing the circumstances in New York evolve so quickly. It became clear that the virus was going to spread through New York. In the middle of March, we could start to see those signs very rapidly, and we didn't want to add to the healthcare strain. So we made the decision to close the floor. Frankly, I'm extraordinarily proud of our technology teams because you have to prepare for these moments when you never know when they might hit. And it was seamless. We didn't have to do additional testing or make any changes because we were prepared for this, and it was fine. We didn't have any issues when we migrated to completely electronic trading. What we did see, and we weren't surprised by this, is we saw that the quality of trading did deteriorate when we moved to fully electronic, which is what we expected because the people weren't there influencing the markets during times of stress. It's still our market model includes a market maker, which is assigned to every stock that's listed on the New York Stock Exchange. Each company has one. That model still performed better than other models, even though those people were remote and electronic, but not quite as good as when you have those people involved. So it was an easy transition, but we definitely did see a deterioration. So as soon as we can safely reopen the floor, we will bring those people back and provide that full level of service. We just are still looking for some of the indicators around, making sure that we can keep people safe.
Yeah, thank you for your leadership and for having everything ready like you did. There was also a lot of questions yesterday about, if you wouldn't mind talking about the circuit breakers that we saw in March. Were you satisfied with how they worked? And I guess the second part, in your opinion, do you think the circuit breakers tend to calm or panic investors?
So I'll give you a shorter answer and then a slightly longer answer. So yes, I was satisfied with how they worked. They worked exactly as designed and provided the function. And the financial services industry and the exchange industry really does come together during times of crisis. Anytime there is an event, we have a retrospective analysis and we decide how can we further improve this. We've done that over the past couple of decades, and each iteration is stronger and more resilient than it was in prior. What we saw was the circuit breakers and all the changes we've made to circuit breakers over the time work very, very well. That said, the longer answer is, as we always do, we will take a step back and say, what did we learn from this? What did we see? If the markets were selling off overnight and they were down 7% for several hours, does it make sense to pause trading right at 9:30 in the morning? There isn't really new information. The first time that we saw, the circuit breakers were originally designed to stop market panic. And I spent a lot of time on the phone with former Treasury Secretary Nick Brady over the past few weeks. So Secretary Brady was part of the Brady Commission that designed the market-wide circuit breakers following the 1987 market crash. And the whole point of implementing those protections was to have a thought-out response based on data and not based on investor panic. That instead of suggesting that we close the market for a period of time, let's give the market a pause so investors can absorb the information. He reached out a number of times because he wanted to make sure that we didn't go back to closing the market because he was hearing the same sentiment out there. So the market-wide circuit breakers worked as designed. We will take a look and see what we learned about them and are there any changes that we want to make to them. But the industry really operated. I don't think people are quite familiar with how many messages run through the exchange systems and the industry systems from a technology standpoint and what it takes to effectively run those markets. On our peak day, we processed 320 billion messages in one day. Wow. Throughout our exchange systems across those platforms. And to do that without having a degradation in how quickly you can do that really matters, because it matters to the market makers and everybody else who is setting the prices and providing those prices to investors, much like not answering the phones. They need to be able to have that experience be consistent. So we upgraded our technology system last year, and this was the first time we got to see it under pressure, but the industry really excelled. And I really do think that there is a lot of work that's gone into that without knowing when you might need it. And we needed it, and it rose to the challenge. And
I want to make sure I heard you right. You said billion with a B messages?
Yes, 320 billion messages. That includes all of the quotes and that go out to the market through market data feeds and everything else. But it was that was 3 times our prior peak. So that was a high water mark, but the prior peak was only just over 100.
That's an amazing number. Let me switch over to, I've got a question in the chat room that I think is interesting. Spencer says, do you think the inability of companies to forecast in this unprecedented times will lead to more companies opting out of providing earnings guidance?
I think it's a really interesting question, and I certainly think it's going to start that conversation. That's a conversation that was already happening about whether or not companies should be providing guidance and whether or not guidance contributes to short-term thinking if you're predicting what your next quarter or your year would look like. So I think this is a bit of an experiment, and I think you'll see that conversation pick up some steam after this. Hard to say if it's really going to change behavior. There are counter views to, I like the scenario that says, if we had somebody uses an example, it says, we're supposed to meet for dinner at 7 p.m. and I know I'm going to be late. If I call you and tell you I'm going to be late, aren't you happier to know that information versus just showing up late? So there are 2 sides to that story. I do think this will elevate that conversation a bit.
Yeah, certainly oil is top of mind right now. I want to switch back to something that's really present day. Some of your markets are involved in oil futures trading. So you've got a front row seat really to the dynamics going on in oil right now. What are your thoughts on what you're seeing in that industry?
Yeah, this is certainly a historic time. Talk about historic periods. The oil market's going negative. The price of oil going negative is certainly not something we've ever seen before. And having it be such an issue that there isn't a place to actually store the oil is really what we're seeing right now. That location is certainly interesting. And the timing is unfortunate because there are really two major things happening at the same time. One, the oil battle in many ways across globally, and two, the reaction to COVID-19. And they're not unrelated, but they're, it's sort of certainly exacerbating the situation. So it's interesting to see how quickly this has been evolving, and I think you're going to see a lot more on that front, especially across government.
Yep. Kyle asks another chat room questions. Do you think the market is moving based on liquidity injected by the Fed, or is it less uncertainty and improving fundamentals?
I think it's both, and we saw specifically in the fixed income market, we saw there was a lack of liquidity in bonds. We saw a lot of struggle in early days, and the Fed took very swift action that was helpful. And so I think that certainly is one area. Every time there's new information, you see the market react to that. Whether it was the potential of Gilead being able to have a therapeutic drug that could address it, we certainly saw that market move in reaction to that. I think it's going to be, once we get through this earnings season, we're going to have a lot more information about what actually was the impact on public companies and how did it impact their businesses. And I think there are going to be some surprises in the mix. I don't think it's always as intuitive as we might think.
That's really interesting. So when we come out of this, can you talk about IPOs? Do you think there'll be any kind of pent-up demand for IPOs?
This is certainly having an effect on the IPO calendar. Obviously, right now, there aren't a large number of companies looking to go public, but companies still need access to capital, and the public markets have the most capital out there. So you'll see some changes. You'll see companies whose businesses are really, we've seen biotech and other companies still be interested right now in tapping the capital markets in order to raise money to continue to operate in their industry. So I think certain industries will be first out, but there are also other companies that even if their industries are impacted, they need to raise more money and may choose the public markets to do that. Where I think you'll see real differences is how they do that. So one of the issues that we're hearing from companies right now is going on the roadshow, and being able to go meet with investors is not something anybody's going to do right now. So there are virtual roadshows, and you're seeing more investor meetings happen virtually. I think that will be a lasting impact. I think you'll start to see one of the things that I think survives this crisis will be how people interact using tools versus getting on planes quite as frequently. The roadshow, we host CEOs with coming off of their roadshow when they're celebrating their IPO, and they're running on adrenaline because they're exhausted. They've literally been out traveling across the country and globally at times too. I think you'll see that become a little bit scaled back and use more virtual, not entirely, but I think you'll see more of a mix of it. If you already have a relationship, it might be easy to connect online versus going out and meeting with somebody that you actually want to see face to face. I think you'll see a mix of that.
Yeah, thank you, Stacey. So you'll see when we get you to Detroit in person, we always end up our events by doing a fun lightning round where we get to know you a little bit better. So I'm just going to ask you one of those questions right now as your final question. Personally, what recreational activity are you most looking forward to when we can open back up?
Well, I think I would have to go with just going out to restaurants. Anyone who knows me knows I like to eat, and I miss my local restaurants, and I feel for them because they are struggling right now just to survive. And I certainly will look forward to that. I also wouldn't mind spending some time on the beach with my family, and there's you hope we make it through that this summer as well.
Well, that's terrific. I want to thank you for your leadership. As you were talking, I was thinking, I don't know when the floor opens who should be able to ring the bell for the first time, but because of your tremendous leadership, I nominate you as the first bell ringer on the day
No, not
before.
me. What we've been doing, Steve, which is rewarding to do, is we've been using our open and closing bell ceremonies throughout this period, even though the floor is closed, to highlight frontline workers. So each day we put up, they send us a photo, and it's an emergency room staff or somebody in a grocery store or Con Edison workers, and we're highlighting them on the Bell podium. And when the time is right, perhaps not when we very first reopen, because we want to be sensitive to the situation, but we will continue to extend our campaign #gratitude to thank all those that are out there keeping us running.
That's a terrific response. So, Stacey, I can't thank you enough again. We look forward to hosting you again when it is safe to do so in person. But continued success. Thank you for your leadership. DEC members, thank you. We'll be doing some more of these. I'm going to ask you to, DEC members, you're going to get an email survey. We want to see what your experience was like. And I also want to just extend a thank you to Grace on Stacey's team for helping us out, and then my team who's in the background pulling all the levers. So Stacey, thank you again so much, and we look forward to seeing you soon.
Thanks, Steve. We'll get through this.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.